Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. I hope you enjoyed having the last couple of weeks off. I know I needed it, but it's good to be back, and it's time to get Series 5 of today's Tolkien Times underway with Week 34's Mailbag Monday. Now, Susan E. from California asks a simple question, but let's see if there's really a simple answer to it. She asks, do we know why Elrond stayed in Middle-earth at the end of the First Age instead of going to Valinor? That is an interesting question, Susan. I'm used to folks asking why Elrond chose to be counted as an elf rather than a man like his brother Elros. I've also been asked why he left Middle-earth at the end of the Third Age and didn't stick around longer, maybe long enough to see his grandchild. But this is the first time I've been asked this particular question on either show, as far as I can remember. Now, the short answer, I'm sorry to say, is no. We don't know precisely what Elrond's reasons were for staying behind, but I think if we read the relevant texts, it won't be hard to reach some reasonable conclusions as to the reasons for his decision. Let's go to chapter 24 in the Silmarillion, of the Voyage of Eärendil and the War of Wrath, and we'll read there a bit about the young Elrond. Bright Eärendil was then lord of the people that dwelt nigh to Sirion's mouths, and he took to wife Elwing the Fair, and she bore to him Elrond and Elros, who are called the Half-Elven. Yet Eärendil could not rest, and his voyages about the shores of the Hitherlands eased not his unquiet. Two purposes grew in his heart, blended as one in longing for the wide sea. He sought to sail thereon, seeking after Tuor and Idril who returned not, and he thought to find perhaps the last shore, and bring ere he died the message of elves and men to the Valar in the west, that should move their hearts to pity for the sorrows of Middle-earth. Then they built Vingalad, and he sailed on adventures, but didn't find Valinor, and finally turning for home. But during the time he was gone, the sons of Fëanor discovered that Elwing was still alive, and that she had the Silmaril that Beren had taken from Morgoth's crown. They sent messages demanding the jewel, but in the end we read, and so there came to pass the last and cruelest of the slayings of elf by elf, and that was the third of the great wrongs achieved by the accursed oath. For the sons of Fëanor that yet lived came down suddenly upon the exiles of Gondolin and the remnant of Doriath, and destroyed them. In that battle some of their people stood aside, and some few rebelled, and were slain upon the other part, aiding Elwing against their own lords. For such was the sorrow and confusion in the hearts of the Eldar in those days. But Maedhros and Maglor won the day, though they alone remained thereafter of the sons of Fëanor, for both Amrod and Amras were slain. Now, Elrond and Elros were taken captive, and if we look at the dates given by Christopher Tolkien in The War of the Jewels, they were only 6 years old at the time, having been born in First Age 532, while the third kinslaying took place in 538. Now, thankfully, though I'm pretty sure Fëanor would have disowned Maglor for showing any pity whatsoever, the poet and singer did exactly that, with the text telling us that he took pity upon Elros and Elrond, and he cherished them, and love grew after between them as little might be thought. Now, after their parents made it to Valinor, Manwë declared his judgment. To Eärendil and to Elwing and to their sons shall be given leave each to choose freely to which kindred their fates shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged. So after the end of the War of Wrath in First Age 587, when he and Elros were 55 years old, they made their choice. Not all the Eldalier were willing to forsake the Hitherlands, where they had long suffered and long dwelt, and some lingered many an age in Middle-earth. Among those were Círdan the shipwright, and Celeborn of Doriath, with Galadriel his wife, who alone remained of those who led the Noldor to exile in Beleriand. In Middle-earth dwelt also Gil-galad the High King, and with him was Elrond Half-Elven, who chose, as was granted to him, to be numbered among the Eldar. But Elros his brother chose to abide with men. And from these brethren alone has come among men the blood of the firstborn and a strain of the spirits divine that were before Arda. Now, some of the reasons, though not mentioned as such, are right there in the texts, and some we have to infer from other facts. Let's start with the fact that Middle-earth was his home. Unlike the Noldor in exile, Elrond had never seen Aman, let alone Aman in the light of the trees. He's also nearly half human as well. One imagines he feels more at home in Middle-earth than he ever would have in Aman. In fact, every part of his heritage came from Middle-earth. Even his lineage from Melian the Maya happened because she came to Middle-earth. But the same is true for his Noldor heritage, his Sindar heritage, and his human heritage. He is of Middle-earth. He is of this place, not of Valinor. Then there's the fact that he was one of High King Gil-galad's top men, eventually becoming his herald and inheriting the Elven Ring Vilya from him. So I'm beginning to feel like if Gil-galad chose to remain, it would make the most sense for Elrond to do the same. There's also the fact that Círdan was staying. Now, Círdan had had a hand in building Vingalat with his father, and so I'm sure there's a little sentimentality there as well. And we don't know yet whether he had met Galadriel and Celeborn's daughter, who would, of course, become his wife, but if she had been around, that certainly would have played a role in it. I also think, though, and this is really important, that Elros's decision had something to do with this. If Elrond were to have gone to Valinor, he would be forever beyond the reach of his brother. Now, I know there is nothing at all to suggest that Elrond ever went to Númenor to visit Elros during the 410 years of his reign as Tar Miniatur, the first king of Númenor. But I have to think that Elrond would have journeyed there near the end of his brother's life. I know it's mere headcanon, but come on. I mean, wouldn't you? And finally, I don't think we can completely rule out fate, doom, the music. Now, that's especially true once Elrond made the choice to be counted among elven kind. Remember, his line, and that of his brother, those lines are reunited when Aragorn and Arwen wed, the third of the three big unions between Eldar and Edain, and the one that brings everything full circle. His decision is a huge part of what Tolkien called the divine plan for the ennoblement of the human race, from the beginning, destined to replace the elves. Those are my reasons for why he stayed behind, Susan. I hope you found the answer to your satisfaction, despite much of it having to be made by inference and supposition. Folks, that wraps it up for Mailbag Monday. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, please email it to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Let him know it's for today's Tolkien Times, and I'll get to it as soon as possible, with priority going to supporters of the show on Patreon. If you'd like to help me keep making this show better, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes. You can become part of my content council, get a bonus episode every week, and a whole lot more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday, as we learn more about the professor himself. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe, follow or subscribe on podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.